of SRA, where we came from, and how everything came into existence today. And what better opportunity is there to do this than during today's luncheon, right? Plus we figured if we were feeding you for free, you might actually show up. Look, it worked. What a concept. Folks, my name is David Bourne, and I'll be serving as your storyteller/MC during our 50th anniversary celebration today. We are going to share a little bit more information about the past 50 years. We are going to show you what happened in the world and what happened with us here at SRA. And there is just so much to say about the last 50 years. So, let's get started. So, I want you to just sit back, relax, unwind, far away from your office, your desk, and your cubicle, and enjoy today's presentation as we take you back in time. How time flies by. Now, our story begins like all good stories do, folks, at the beginning. When, in 1966, a group of business managers from Yale University formalized themselves into the Association of Research and Education Administrators. And with one article and a sentence about this group in the laboratory management, the secret was out. Some months later, the Society of Research Administrators was tentatively titled. The first bylaws, which were presented in June 1967 at the University of Massachusetts, and from tentatively, a motion was passed that we, the research administrators present, hereby constitute ourselves into an organization. So, SRA was incorporated as a nonprofit organization in the state of Connecticut in 1967 with its first president, Ken Hartford. In 1968, the Western section adopted their bylaws, followed by the Northeastern section. And finally, the first newsletter was published in August in Irvine, California. Our second president at this time was Richard Nicholson. Ah, yes. And in 1969, the first issue of the Journal of Research Administration was published. Soon after, the third annual meeting with 200 attendees was held at the University of California at Berkeley, where a national secretariat was proposed. Well, look, we've already made our way to the 70s. Let's take a look at this psychedelic era. Our first speaker today has an extensive history with the Society. He was a former chairman of the Strategic Planning Committee in 1994-96, a member of the Board of Advisors 90 through 94, served as treasurer 87 through 89, was program chair in 1984, president of the Western Section 82, member and nominations committee 1979, president Southern California Chapter 1979, treasurer of the Southern California Chapter 1979, and membership chairman of the Southern California Chapter 1977. Without further ado, please welcome to the stage, Dan Oshiro.
Thank you, David. That picture up there that you saw, that was me in the 20s when I first started the SRA in 1971. There was a song in the 70s, in 1974, by Barbra Streisand called The Way We Were. And that's how some of us were. I want to give you a flavor of what it was like in the decade of the 70s for the Society. He gave you some of the highlights of the songs and societal events that were occurring. That was the age of disco. But in the Society, we had total membership of the Society was less than 700. At this meeting, we have 1,500, but the total Society membership was in the 700s, and in national meetings, the total attendance was in the 200s. I understand this meeting is 1,500. The regional meetings numbered less than 100. And the structure of the national meetings in the fall and the regional meetings in the spring was in place then. And chapters were just emerging. They were beginning to get set up. And in those days, if you can imagine 200 people at a meeting, it was much easier to connect and meet with people than it is today. Now, the demographics of the Society in the 70s, remember that photo at the beginning? I was in my 20s, just out of college, new job, my first annual meeting, felt like a fish out of water. So how many of you remember your first meeting, or how many for you is this your first meeting? Some? Well, the demographics of the Society in those days, in the 70s, was mostly white males with crew cuts, wearing black suits, white shirts, skinny black ties. There were few women, few minorities. And interestingly, there was a lot of industry members in those early days. And a number of Canadian members, but certainly not on an international scale like we see today, where so many countries are represented at this meeting. So I wanted to spend some time in describing why I think the Society is important. So how many of you have been asked by your parents or others, what is it you do? And how many of you find it difficult to answer that question? Okay, well, that is the essence of what the Society exists for, I think. The decade of the 70s laid the foundation for establishing ourselves as a profession. And I'm going to provide some examples of that. Profession is defined as jobs with a formalized body of knowledge and qualifications, involves testing and certifying that individuals have mastered that body of knowledge, includes continuing education, and must have an association or society in existence that promotes that profession. I took some time to review the journal articles, the SRA journal, as well as the topics of the annual meetings in the decade of the 70s. And in that, what you'll find are many, many topics related to defining the profession, documenting the profession, establishing the roles, comparing organizational structures, talking about the interface between scientists and administrators. All of those topics were common. We were studying and defining the profession in that decade. If you Google research administration books, you'll find many books on the subject, and many are written by SRA members. One of the seminal books is The Administration of Sponsored Programs by Ken Beasley, Mike Dingerson, Oliver Hensley, Larry Hess, and John Rodman. All are SRA members, and John, I believe, is here in the audience, actually. Another influential book is University Connected Research Foundations by Ray Daniels, Ralph Martin, Lawrence Eisenberg, Jay Llewellyn, and Ronald Wright. Also, SRA members. There we were documenting the profession. Does anyone know when we were last in San Antonio for the national meeting? It was 1977. The national meeting was held in San Antonio, and the keynote address at that meeting was The Emerging Profession of Research Administration by Dr. Frank Andrews. And if you go right next door and see the exhibit hall, you'll see a booth on certified research administrators, and you'll see a number of booths on university programs on master's degrees in research administration. The SRA and those master's programs are the capstone of making research administration a profession. The decade of the 70s was spent studying research administration, defining it, establishing roles and boundaries, and documenting the profession. I want to thank all those pioneers that contributed in the 70s in that process. So you should now be in a much better position to answer that question. What is it you do? Finally, and most importantly, that scared and intimidated young man that you saw in that photo was quickly embraced by the members of the society and welcomed. I urge you all to take advantage of the time to connect with your SRA colleagues. That investment will pay you dividends multiple times in return, both professionally and personally. I count many of the SRA members as many of my lifelong friends. I am fortunate and blessed to have fallen into this profession, probably as many of you have, and I urge you, all of you, not to miss the opportunity of meeting the best people in the world. Thank you.
Kind of embarrassing. Okay. Awkward. Hey. It's love ABBA. Oh, yes. Hello, ladies. How we doing? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for some Q&A with some members of SRA and even a past president. Yes. Now, first, I have a question for you. Miss Shirley Hill. Miss Hill, when was your first meeting with SRA International? What do you recall about that?
Well, it was in the early 70s, I think somewhere around 74. Reston, Virginia, Roslyn, Virginia, something like that. It was my very first meeting. I came along with a couple of other people from Penn, and they introduced me to Alan Morrison, who I remember well. He was a good friend at the time, and introduced me around. And one thing they told me especially to do is when you go to an SRA meeting, go out and meet the people that are there that you don't know. Don't sit with everybody you know all the time.
Sounds good. Good advice, everybody. How about that? Indeed. Thank you, ma'am. Yes, she's spoken before. And now we're going to move on to our next question. Now, my next question is for Miss Sandra Nordahl. Ex-President 2012-2014. My question is this, Sandra. Do you remember the first person you met at an SRA international meeting? First person you met.
Actually, I do, and she's sitting right here. It's Kathleen Hogue Gonzalez, and we were fortunate enough to meet each other across the street from the Hotel Del because we couldn't afford to stay at the Del in 1983. So I've known Kathleen the whole time, and we've always kept in touch, and she's a lovely person, and we've traveled together internationally, and she's always been a really great resource for me.
There it is, a lasting friendship all established here at SRA. That's outstanding. And now we've come to you, ma'am. I know you're ready for this. We have one more. My final question, don't turn that light out yet. Now, this is for a member, Rebecca Claycamp. Rebecca, here's your question. What is your favorite part of an SRA international meeting?
It's got to be about the network and the connections. Over the years, I always meet new people, and as Dan was saying, you make lifelong friends, both professionally and personally, and it's the reason I'm at the NIH. It wouldn't be without the connections that I had at SRA that got me to the NIH, so it's all about the connections.
Well done, ladies. Give them a hand, everybody. That's right. Relationship established, still continuing to this very day. And that's what it's all about at SRA. I guess now we've made our way, folks, to the wild and crazy 80s. Let's see what's going on in the land of Madonna. I don't know if we're going to have enough time to do an intro. I think I've got a voice of God intro, right? I have a voice of God. Right? Our next speaker is the Director of Research Protection Programs at Loma Linda University and past president of SRA International from 1983 to 1984. With over 40 years of experience, she is here to remind us what the 80s were like as a member of SRA International. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Miss Linda Halstead.
First, I'd like to take you back for just a moment to 1975. About that time, NIH told our institution, Loma Linda University, we're not going to be sending our NIH packages, our grant proposal packages, to the individual investigators. Do you remember those packages? Anybody? Great big old fat things? Yeah. So they wanted one address. So that was the job description, one address. Bring in those proposal applications and send them back out to the investigators. So I didn't apply. I was invited to do this. My qualifications? Well, I was pretty good at writing and editing, but here's the main qualification, and that is I was the daughter of a researcher. And this researcher happened to be very good at getting grants and proposal writing. So I think they figured it was genetic. So I have to say they sneaked in IRB and IACUC later. Things, and then you write your own job description. That's the fun part. Okay, so I'd been in the job just a couple of months, when I get a flyer in the mail that says, you know, meetings, Society of Research Administrators, I'd never heard of SRA. I hadn't even heard of research administration. I didn't know that that's what I was doing. So, but I looked at the program. It had topics like how to submit, you know, successful proposals. There were going to be speakers from NIH, NSF, DOD, National Endowments, in management and leadership. So it's like, okay, sign me up, sounds good. Now I just want to let you know that I'm from Loma Linda University. Is a very strong healthcare institution, very strong in education and training, modest in research at that time. But this researcher father of mine had implanted, probably again genetically, it's not what you know, it's who you know. So I figured when I go to these meetings, I better get acquainted with some people. So I'm off to Las Vegas. But one of the little songs that we might have been singing at Loma Linda was, I don't smoke and I don't chew and I don't go with boys who do. And the second verse might have been something like, and I don't gamble and I don't drink, but I'm off to Las Vegas. So this idea of get to know people, go to the reception. So I go to the evening reception. In those days, it was a closed door. I just picture this. I open the door, and here's a room full of smoke, a lot of men, people lined up for food and drink. And I was about ready to turn tail and go, I can't do this. And followed by the name of Jim, I'm sorry, I don't know his last name. It was like an angel appeared. And he came, introduced himself. If you know Dan Oshiro, is that kind of a person. Somebody who likes people. He reached out, he said, you know, where are you from, so on. You should meet. And the next thing I know, he was dragging me from person to person. And I was meeting all these really marvelous people. Yeah, so that was the beginning of what I call my Alice in Wonderland experience. This was the 7th annual meeting of SRA. And one of the things I do remember about the meeting otherwise is it was the transition of leadership from Lorraine Lasker, first female SRA president, to Dave Canham. And little did I realize that I would become the second female president of SRA. Okay. Now my LA chapter was largely, the participants were largely from aerospace. What a fun experience to get to know people from a totally different industry. And we got a lot of exercises in management skills and leadership. Okay, so it was my obligation to go to every chapter meeting, every section meeting, every national meeting. And in that process, I started getting, well, I hate to use the word critical, but I started getting, I don't know, I had creative ideas about what these meetings should be. Now, there's a good thing and a bad thing about that. You can either shut up and enjoy the meetings, or you're liable to be on a track to leadership. So, some of the innovative things that happened in the planning of meetings, I remember specifically planning the 1979 meeting for San Francisco, the national meeting, and we spent a lot of time thinking about members. Who were all of our members? University, industry, hospitals, government, and Canadian. We recognized we wanted to be inclusive, so we gave a lot of thought to each session, and that the concurrent sessions would specifically address each of those market segments. One of the things in a society is you want to make sure you retain members as well as bring new ones in. And I think SRA's been good about that. The other thing we did at that meeting for the first time is we had special opportunity for VA members. Any VA people here? Okay, so the topics that were going on at that time was things like allowable costs, preparing budgets. There were no modular budgets. Negotiating overhead rates. I remember a lot of discussion about negotiating overhead rates. But in general, I would say it was about service, and that really resonated with me. Now, mind you, I never heard the word compliance. Didn't come up. In those early days, there was no OPRR, OHRP. BIDOL hadn't happened yet. I had not a clue what tech transfer meant. And nothing about computer softwares. Well, when you go to meetings, the get acquainted conversation, the conversation starters were, first you ask, what kind of institution are you from? Second question is, are you pre-award or post-award? The next question is, what is your level of funding? And for me, the last question always was, where the heck is Loma Linda? Southern California, by the way. Okay, so challenges of SRA leadership in the early 80s. Keep in mind that we are transitioning from, on the national political scene, we're transitioning from the peanut farmer, Jimmy Carter, to the Hollywood actor, Ronald Reagan. So the 70s concluded with federal deficits, high unemployment, high inflation, and the 80s began with a focus on tax cuts, increased federal defense spending, slashing social programs, reducing government regulations. What was SRA focused on in that kind of an environment? Hold steady. Finances, keep our members, member retention. How did I become president? Once again, I have not a clue. I didn't run for the office. It was, grab them by the collar and say, you will serve. I thought, how bad can it be? The issues of leadership during my administration were, well, I must say they wanted continuity. As you can imagine in that environment, continuity. So that was when they had a 3-term position. You would serve as past president, president-elect, president, and past president. Finances were an issue, you can well imagine. So we had discussions, and retaining members, especially thinking about our Canadian partners, our industry partners. So when we looked at finances, we were concerned about dues. We had a long discussion about the psychological effect of having dues go over $100. And I don't know why we didn't consider just going with $99.99. We also cut back on the open bar. Always thinking about the financial status. I want to say that, do you still have a sergeant of arms? The sergeant of arms was the most important person that I could imagine having by my side. Keep in mind the membership was still the pioneers, the ones who had a lot of commitment, a lot of ownership. And my greatest fear was running a business meeting and have it run amok. So the sergeant of arms was my buddy, and he kept things going strong.
There you go.
So I thank you for this opportunity to share what SRA meant to me. And I want to leave by just thanking and saluting these early colleagues, Lorraine, Ken, Jack, Dave, Dick, Steve, Roger, Joanne, Julie, Robert, Don. Thank you all.
Now, our next speaker is a retired research administrator and recovering lobbyist from the University of Kentucky and SRA International past president from 1987 to 98. So, Bill here has been an inspiration, I want you to know, an inspiration for research, management, and administration across the world. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big San Antonio welcome to Bill Schwery, everybody.
Hello, SRA. I'm going to talk about the 1990s, and I love all of you, but the first person who says I wasn't born then loses your cake, okay? That's how it is. I'm not putting up with any stuff. SRA in the early 1990s was characterized by slow, steady growth. As the society grew, so did our budget. We were up around $1 million by the middle of the 90s, big money for us. There were concerns from leadership that we might have a liability sitting out there. In the event that we had some sort of catastrophic failure at an annual meeting, we might go under. You know, I'm talking about something like a hurricane at a national meeting, something like that. Of course, we did have the hurricane incident at Pat O'Brien's that John Rodman caused that. That's right. I remember that. Paul Wagaman and I were asked by President Claudette Beyer to help fix the problem at the 25th annual meeting. We were asked by Claudette to put on a great meeting, super speakers. We were asked to add a substantial contribution to the coffers, and we were asked to attract a lot of new members. Well, Paul Wagaman said, hey, no problem. We're at Disneyland. We'll have lots of new members. And we did. We had almost 1,000 of our best friends show up to celebrate with us in Orlando for the 25th meeting. We had a great annual meeting. Of course, Paul and I put in a lot of hard work and time, banging away on the plan. And we were 500 feet from Pleasure Island. Did I mention that earlier? 7 bars, unique music, all different. Paul and I decided we better go over there and do some reconnaissance just in case. Quality control, hands-on. So we marched over there early one evening, came back very, very late. You can't imagine how far 500 feet is really, really late after hitting 7 bars. We were trying to get back, you know, without an incident, embarrassing ourselves or the society. We were doing really well. We got right up to the back door, and as Paul reached to open the back door, he stepped on my hand and I screamed. Oh well, anything to produce a good meeting, right? The society increased its strategic reserve throughout the next 8 years in the 90s. While the annual meeting continued to grow and prosper, we also moved in new directions, especially in the late 90s. 3 things characterized those late 90 years. First, increased collaboration with our federal agencies in D.C. We also increased mentoring and partnerships as an expansion of our foundation for professional development and education. And we increased interaction with our colleagues and other research managers in the UK, Europe, the Caribbean, and China. It was serendipitous, I think, that SRA had a series of presidents who had the requisite capabilities to make all of this happen. Don Clark preceded me as president in 1996, and he was a GMO at the National Institutes of Health. And I was followed by President Lynn Chronister in 1998. We all had extensive networks in Washington, D.C. with the federal government, and we had a shared vision of how SRA could move forward by collaborating with our friends in D.C. Let me offer a couple of examples of what SRA accomplished over that time. We developed a collaboration with Paul Gaffney, the Admiral at ONR, we actually co-hosted with him the first national seminar on ONR funding in 30 years. We partnered with the National Institute for Child Health and Human Development to initiate a mentorship program for the extramural associates who were being trained at NIH at that time. Our contacts allowed us to launch the first executive retreat for senior research managers at Park City, Utah. Fishing had something to do with that, by the way. We sponsored 2 study tours of U.S. funding agencies and universities for our colleagues in the UK and Europe in collaboration with Richard Tomlinson from Newcastle. We partnered with the NIH Fogarty Center and ONR to provide training in how to access U.S. funding as a foreign investigator. And we put that show on in Australia, Ireland, and even sunny Bristol in the UK. We engaged with the Federal Demonstration Project to develop electronic research management systems. All these efforts were really hugely successful and allowed SRA to develop a much stronger national and even an international persona. That led to international being added to the SRA name in 1998. In 1999, Lynn Chronister and Elliot Kulikowski initiated a discussion of how the various research management societies around the globe might coordinate their efforts and work together to identify and teach best international practices. These efforts have continued to the present and are still providing excellent professional education opportunities, not only to our members, but to our collaborators. As the 1990s came to close, we were fortunate to have Elliot Kulikowski as our president in 2000. He continued to grow the initiatives from the 90s, and he provided the leadership necessary for SRA to transition into the new 21st century. Thank you.
It is December 30th, 11:59 p.m., 1999. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and nothing. Nothing happened. Not a thing. No Y2K meltdown. You know, I'm sure a lot of you folks remember when we moved into the 21st century that the biggest disappointment at this point was that nothing happened. Your 4-gigabyte computer did not crash. Airplanes did not fall from the sky. And the world continued to spin. Wow, shocker. However, one thing did change. SRA in the new century entered the new millennium with a new name. We are now known as SRA International. And now, let's go to the video to see how the world was changing around us in the year 2000. A lot of you may remember our next speaker from his 2015 annual meeting closing keynote address, where he transferred us into the world of research administration through the music of Elvis Presley. He is currently the research facilitator at Liverpool Hope University and has traveled all the way from Liverpool, UK to be with us here today. Let's please give it up for Mr. Colin Cooper.
Good afternoon. The noughties, as they became known, was a decade that brought about many considerable changes for the Society and its membership, most significantly being the introduction and use of electronic research administration and the internationalization of research and its management. This was the decade when we submitted proposals online for the first time to various funders. SRA and its members were at the forefront of this change, and we held a conference in Manchester in 2000, which had 250 delegates from 35 countries and all the major international funding bodies to talk about the future of research and its management of research through use of electronic research administration. From the feedback and outputs of the Manchester conference, it became obvious that research was now an internationalized operation, and it was decided to add international to the SRA's name. At the same time, we saw the establishment of new research management societies across the world, many of whom will be represented here today. The SRA was proactive in helping these societies get started and in helping them to establish themselves. In 2001, at the SRA annual meeting in Vancouver, the International Network of Research Management Societies was formed, INORMS, my acronym. INORMS would enable interaction, sharing of good practice and joint activities between the member societies to the benefit of their individual members. In 2008, the INORMS meeting was held in my own home city of Liverpool, and that's when we managed to get the infamous letter from Prime Minister Blair supporting the activity. The decade saw the development of large international collaborative projects that aim to resolve major issues on a global scale, such as global terrorism and excuse me, cancer, food security, and other large projects. We saw our faculty involved in groundbreaking collaborative projects, such as the Human Genome Project and the International Space Station. Electronic administration meant that we could manage these large international projects, and as we as administrators had to adapt to a changing environment where email and mobile communication became the norm, where we lost our 5.5-inch floppies and moved to a USB hard drive. For the first time, I think we found sponsors truly valuing the management and administration of the non-scientific aspects of these huge international projects. And we certainly became closer to our own PIs in helping them through the new systems and compliance required to run large international collaborative projects. The SRA grew in terms of membership and its outreach. With funding from Carnegie Corporation and the MacArthur Foundation, we ran training programs in Africa and Saudi Arabia. And the Civilian Research Development Foundation supported training in Russia and the former Soviet states. This training was not only for fledgling universities and their research support staff, but also for their senior management, so they could move into the new era of truly international research development. The training not only concentrated on the basics of research administration for new staff, but also saw senior management establishing a research culture within their own universities. The Society runs study tours for international members to the US universities and various federal sponsors, many of which established links that are still active today, and they became an invaluable source of guidance and research funding opportunities currently, past, present, and future. There was a distinct push for improved levels of training to be supplied to the membership as a drive to professionalize research administration became stronger. We saw the further development of the Certified Research Administrator, the growth in available MBAs in research administration, and professional doctorates. There were a number of other significant developments that SRA staff and its members were involved in. The publication of the Bible on Research Administration, edited by Elliot Kolakowski and Lynn Chronister. The Jones and Bartlett publication, Research Administration and Management, was first published in 2006, with a significant contribution from many SRA members. The SRA continued to grow, and the decision was made to move into new permanent headquarters in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here, you can take a break. I'm a hot air balloon that could go to space. With the air, like I don't care, baby, by the way. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do.
Ladies and gentlemen, what you see on stage at this time is SRA International from the beginning until now. We are all part of the past, part of the future, and part of right now. And now, we're going to try something different, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go, stay with me. To see who the members of the Society of Research Administrators International really are. You still with me? Was the dessert more fun than me? Don't answer that. All right, hang on there. No, here we go, here we go. What we're going to do is this. At this time, folks, I would like to ask everyone who has been a member of the society since the 60s and the 70s to please stand up and remain standing. Just for a little bit, I promise. 60s and 70s. Stand up, remain standing. All right, there it is. There we are. There we are. Stay right there. Stay up. Remain standing. You won't be there long. Next, I would like to have everyone who's been with us from the 80s. From the 80s. 80s. Stand up. 80s. See what we got here. Ah, yes. Yes. There we go. Now, everyone from the 90s. From the 90s. Please stand up if you worked in the 90s with us. 90s. Been here. Nice. Nice. And now, the year 2000. And everyone who's joined us after the year 2000, please stand up. Ah, yeah. Members, I want you to look around you. This is who we are. This is the Society of Research Administrators International. Give yourselves a hand. Here it is. Ha ha. Well, there it is. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you again for coming out to our 50th anniversary luncheon. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your stay here in the beautiful Alamo City. I'm David Bourne. Have a great day, everybody. So long. Long live SRA! Great song. Well done. Get a new career if there's a writer. Very funny. Very funny. Thank you. Thank you, man. Thank you. Let's get a photo up here, guys. Get a group photo. Group photo. Group photo. Group photo. Put them in here. Let's put the press down center here. I'll be off on the end here. Here we go. You guys down. Here we go.